Good afternoon, fellow students. This is Mike Rubinson. I'm going to be presenting today the topic of plagiarism, the ethical debate of plagiarism in our modern journalistic world. The theories I chose to go off of were of Socrates. The reason why is because I happen to find his view on people very interesting. And simply, to very simply put, his view as it relates to our ethical debate, Socrates does not believe that as people we will intentionally do bad, or we intentionally have bad thoughts. He believes in good, and then he believes in ignorance. And I find that very important because in his eyes, you will not knowingly do something bad. You may believe that you're doing something good, but because you haven't learned about it correctly, you're acting out of ignorance. And one of his points that I drew off of was, if one knows what is good, one will act in such a way to achieve it. I find that very prevalent because if you've been, shown the correct path, if someone has told you how to, go about whatever task you're doing in the right way, or even if it's just, something silly, like a chore, you're going to do it in the right way, and you're going to just naturally say, oh, this is how I'm supposed to do it in the back of your head as you're working. That's just going to be going off. And I find that very important to our topic because in today's world where, journalism has expanded and evolved so much, I personally feel as though people haven't exactly, the rules or the unwritten rules even, overjournalism hasn't exactly caught up to where we're at. To discuss that, the first current event I'm going to mention is one that we actually covered in class, and that was the story of Chris Hedges, the reporter from the New York Times who was caught plagiarizing. And I find his case is very interesting, though, because, and I picked these because they involve the gray area that I think that a lot of us hopefully won't get caught in, but probably will. He had worked alongside with another reporter, and had asked when he was writing this newer updated story for the New York Times if he could go back and use Katz's material from the previous story from the Philadelphia Inquirer. The Katz had agreed; everything was fine as long as I think it was stated that as long as Hedges showed Katz the draft and he was able to look over it, was good. Apparently, he didn't do that. He took information, ran the story, thought everything was fine, but then was caught. Now, the reason why I find this is interesting as far as this particular debate, and we'll see with the next story, is that how wrong was Hedges in using that information. Now, and the story goes on saying that they thought that he had done this type of plagiarizing in other works, and he had lifted certain lines for stories, and claimed that, oh, I didn't actually lift it, I used my own interpretation of it. But as far as a New York Times story taking off of Katz, how wrong was Chris Hedges? Is that really plagiarism? And if so, why didn't he know that what he was doing was indeed wrong? We'll get into that after I talk about the next story. The next story I found, which I originally discovered something on CNN, which led me to an article in the Washington Post, and it was an article talking about a reporter. I'm going to pull her name up so I don't mispronounce it. The writer was Marie-Louise Guckerman, and she was a news editor for CNN's London office. Now, her case, very interesting. She used to work for Reuters, written articles from them. Now that she was at CNN, she was writing similar international stories and had actually used information she had published in her previous works for CNN. It was under a random check that CNN does every now and then, I'm assuming. They caught this. They caught the copying, and they had decided that she had plagiarized, and she got fired. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about the total problem of this after I mentioned the story is that you have two seemingly very different ways of going about, or who people who've plagiarized, but we must examine why, or why would they have done it in an era where it's very easy just to look up what plagiarism is and how it's done and why you shouldn't do it. And I think that as far as Chris Hedges, Yes. Part of it could have been out of a sheer laziness of sorts, or maybe just a rushed feeling of, oh, I need to get a story, I need to use all this information, I don't want to go out there all the time. But he felt as though since he had access to it, he worked with the other reporter, that if he, as long as he was told that he could use it, he could use the information for his story. As far as Guckerman working with the CNN, she had used her information from her own stories, stories that she had already done the research and the writing for. Now, I will preface that CNN right now is going back and checking those original stories to see if she had plagiarized those. But if she hasn't, which I'm going to go on her side saying she hasn't as of right now, was it wrong of her to use her own work in the current stories? And more importantly, why did she feel the need to do that instead of physically going out again? Well, I think it comes back to a problem that we currently face in journalism, where it comes down to the crunch time. It's a very competitive business now, and that's, I think, a very good way to look at it, is that journalism is a business nowadays, and it's a struggling business. To stay afloat, to stay alive, you have to be pumping out as many quality stories as a journalist as you can to keep the publication that you're working for out there. And I think because of that, many journalists are put under the pressure, and unfortunately, whether they're finding ways or they just happen to accidentally do it, it's getting to a point where you're seeing more plagiarism coming out in a time where you would almost think that we would be going less and less of it. And to the last thing I did want to mention, I did this purposely because I think it relates to us more so. Was an article I found on USA Today's student blog, and it goes into how universities in New York and Arizona, they essentially found that students working for the student newspapers at these schools had published stories with plagiarism in it. Now, why is this so interesting? I mean, you hear of students plagiarizing all the time. Well, it's interesting because you would think as students learning this craft, learning this field, you would almost be even more anal not to do it simply to pass a class, or so you don't have anything on your record going out to get a job. However, if you think about it logically, these are students just like us. They go to school full time. They probably have jobs. They have other scholastic responsibilities that put the pressure on them that, similar to real life pressure once you're in a job. They almost didn't have I don't want to say they didn't have a choice, but they were very much pushed almost, I would feel, into this. And that's a very big problem. There has to be... there has to come a point, and very, very soon, because, like I said, of just how far journalism has come in the past, you can even say 10 years, but 10, 15, 20 years, and the rules and how we view the rules really haven't caught up to this. And it's a shame to see the students, the people learning to do this craft, like us, resorting to the need to copy the work and to add things that they might not realize are actually considered plagiarism. And that's why I thought it was important. And that's the end of this discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below and, or message me, however. But I hope you enjoyed this, and have a great night, guys.